counting ballots either that arrive after Election Day. It's only an issue because of mail-in ballots. Part of the current crisis is the left's attack on election integrity. And what they try to do is dismantle the idea of Election Day, of elections generally. I mean, my view is an election that begins weeks and months before Election Day and counting that extends well past Election Day, that's not an election. To me, the left doesn't want to steal elections. I mean, I know they do. They want to end elections. They don't like them. And so they want to eliminate them, generally speaking, in terms of the elections as we've known them. You go to vote on Election Day. They know who you are. They understand you're a citizen, and they count the ballots more or less on that day. And Judicial Watch has been a leader in ensuring election integrity, going to court to ensure the voting rolls are cleaned up, successfully doing so. 4 million names removed from the rolls in just the last few years, thanks to Judicial Watch's heavy lifting. And we have new lawsuits in Illinois and Mississippi, as we've discussed, over the counting of ballots that arrive after Election Day. Many states count ballots that arrive after Election Day. Federal law sets an election day, not an election week, not an election month. And by accepting and receiving ballots after Election Day, they're extending the election, obviously, contrary to law, inviting voter fraud and undermining voter confidence. In Illinois, we're still battling, I guess at the appellate level, it was a 2-1 decision saying a candidate didn't have the right to challenge that unlawful behavior. Just insanity to me. So we're going to probably have to appeal that to the Supreme Court. But we had an appellate argument in the case that we brought in Mississippi just earlier this week. And one of our leading election integrity lawyers, Russ Nobile, argued for us, because Mississippi, as I said, they count ballots that arrive after Election Day for up to 5 days. I think there are 18 states that do it. Like, anyone can vote, and as long as it gets there within a certain amount of time after Election Day, it would get counted. California at 7 days, I think DC at 7 days. Nevada, they count ballots that arrive 3 days after Election Day, even if they don't have a postmark. And other ballots are allowed to come in even later than that with a postmark. I mean, talk about inviting fraud. And forget about being an awful policy that invites fraud. The law is clear. There's an election day. And this is what our lawsuit argued. Under federal law, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of every even-numbered year is Election Day. Congress recently reaffirmed a single national election day when it enacted the Electoral Count Reform Act. So they remember in response to January 6th, they reformed the law and left the Election Day deadline in place. Under the recent congressional amendments, no extension of Election Day shall be allowed unless there are force majeure events that are extraordinary and catastrophic that justify extension. Something like a hurricane hitting your state, maybe? That's what we mean by force majeure events. Despite Congress's unambiguous and long-standing statement regarding the single and uniform national election day, Mississippi extended Election Day by allowing 5 additional days after Election Day for receipt of absentee ballots. And I talked about the issue generally in this video from a few months ago, but it's still pretty on point. Let's run it. Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with some big news. We have a civil rights lawsuit for Mississippi voters who object to that state's counting ballots for up to 5 days that arrive, absentee ballots, after an election. Federal law allows for an election day, not an election week. We also have a lawsuit in Illinois where they count ballots that arrive for up to 14 days after an election, even without a valid postmark. I tell you, counting ballots after Election Day is a great way to invite fraud. It undermines confidence in the elections. Plus, it's downright illegal. And as we note in the lawsuit, counting untimely, illegal, and invalid votes such as those received in violation of federal law, substantially increases the pool of total votes cast and dilutes the weight of votes cast by plaintiffs' members representing the Libertarian Party and others in support of plaintiffs' federal nominees. So unlawful votes ruin valid votes, potentially negate them. 1.7% of the votes cast in Mississippi were received after Election Day. That's not right. So in this case, the lower court said no. Judicial Watch and the Republican National Committee has a separate lawsuit. You know, they liked it looks like to me they liked our idea and filed their own lawsuit, which is fine. More power. We invite folks to enforce the rule of law any way they can under the law. Of course, on the other side are leftist groups fighting us, no matter what we do. And the lower court ruled against us on the merits, which means that they said, "Oh no, Congress didn't set this rule in place." I'm not sure what the rule is then. If you can receive ballots for up to 5 days after Election Day, why can't you receive ballots for up to 30 days after Election Day? Or 60 days? Or 90 days? Or well into the next Congress, if it's a member of Congress, well into the next Congress? Obviously, it's Election Day. And so we appealed it, and we asked for, the RNC at least asked for, we agreed for expedited consideration by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the U.S. Court of Appeals that handles Mississippi, and they also handle, I think, Texas, and I forget which other states. But so the panel heard argument from Russ and all the other attorneys involved in the case the other day. Russ Nobile, Judicial Watch's attorney, representing the Libertarian Party. And here are some clips from the oral argument of Judicial Watch's lawyer Russ doing the heavy lifting for cleaner elections.
The original public meaning of the day of election is at the time of enactment meant the day that voters expressed their choice and made it known to officials. That is receipt. That is what happened in Viva Voice voting, and that's what happened in ticket voting. Nothing mattered until they dropped it in the box. And then that didn't change when America adopted the Australian ballot beginning in 1890. And the third reason is the actual text of the statute. 3 U.S.C. 1 says that electors shall be appointed on Election Day. Under Mississippi's law, it must wait 5 business days for voters' choices and the final selections to roll in before it can appoint people. Now, as a matter of practice, Mississippi does extend canvassing days after election. We don't dispute that, but that's not required by law. And if the Speaker of the House called up Mississippi on Wednesday after election, and they said, "Who did you appoint or who did you nominate to be your electors?" Mississippi could do it, but under the current regime, they would have to tell the Speaker to wait 5 days before we can give you an answer. That is modifying and inconsistent with the original public meaning of the Election Day.
The act of counting the ballots is different and separate, and that can happen 5 days, 5 weeks. Bush v. Gore can happen, in December after the election. So is your position that recounts and ballot counting and, ballot sort of looking at hanging chads and all the rest of that after Election Day, is that preempted by 3 U.S.C. Section 1?
No, Your Honor.
Because what if the Speaker of the House called the Secretary of State in Florida and said, "Who are your electors, Bush or Gore?"
They would say they wouldn't be able to give them the answer, but they would still be calculating it. And we described this in our reply brief. If you get everyone in a room and they cast a vote and they put it in a box, that decision is made inside that box. You don't know the results yet, but that decision is in that box. As it stands now, you have to wait 5 more days for decisions to come into that box, and you can't make that decision. So the complexities and the difficulties in certifying and calculating the election can slow down the process, but that is not when an election occurs. An election occurs when a voter is their choice. They make it known and communicate it to election officials by a given time, and the given time is on or before Election Day. That's what reconciles the absentee voting and early voting, because they can do it before, but they can't extend it after. Russell Nobile from Judicial Watch again. I want to do some drive-bys on a couple of things that have been brought up to the court. RNC versus DNC. That is a case about a federal primary. It does not apply to USC 7, 3 USC 1, or 2 USC 1. I'm not saying the court needs to ignore it, but in that context, the Supreme Court was not looking at how the term election or election day was applied in those statutes. It has very little relevance to the actual text of the statute in question here, no more so than a state election would be relevant to the election day statutes. We don't need a textual conflict. We have a textual conflict. 3 USC 1 requires them to appoint electors by election day. They are fundamentally unable to. It is inconsistent for that purpose. But there's a myriad of other reasons why it's inconsistent, but that is a clear, direct conflict to the extent the court still believes such is necessary. We ask that the court rule in our favor and remand this back to the Southern District of Mississippi so we can have remedial proceedings and decide what issues remain.
Yeah, and you can see Russ did an excellent job there, and it's interesting just to see the interaction with the judges in cases like this. We're hopeful that the court rules in our favor. You never know until the ruling actually comes. We expect the ruling. It could come at any time. It's because it's expedited. It could come at any time. So it's not going to come by the time you watch this video, likely, but meaning over the next day or so, or over the weekend. But it could come within 2 weeks or so of the argument, which was on September 25th. But, you know, as I'm listening to Russ, I'm thinking it's like, you know, so much of this is caused by the abomination of massive unsupervised voting by mail. Counting ballots after election is purely a creature, assuming that there's a necessity to do it, and I don't believe there is. Counting ballots either that arrive after Election Day, it's only an issue because of mail-in ballots. And I think there should be no mailing in of ballots except in extraordinary circumstances. As I've said, unless you're getting fired upon by bad guys in a foreign country on behalf of the United States military, everyone else should essentially be voting in person. The exceptions prove the rule. And so once you start mailing out ballots to whoever, to lists that are too dirty, as our litigation has shown, and then expecting them to get back, of course they're going to get delayed, or there's going to be incentive to delay them if they know they're going to get counted after the election. That's where the fraud issue pops up. And I had a tweet on this issue where I talked about unsupervised voting and reference to a speech I gave, I guess it was CPAC in 2021. Do we have that video? At least.
And let me be clear, in case I haven't been, voting by mail should generally be ended. Vote by mail makes it nearly impossible to detect or even to pretend to prevent fraud. This security gap undermines confidence in the elections. You know, unless you're putting your life on the line in Afghanistan or have some other emergency reason, the law should require you to vote in person. After your citizenship and eligibility have been verified, and after you show your secure photo ID. And no ballot harvesting. None.
I agree with that man. Security gap. Think about that. There's a security gap with mailed-in ballots. Now, I know some states have tried to minimize that gap, but it's imperfect. It almost is impossible to police fraud in any substantial way with unsupervised voting. So we should be, and I'm not saying you shouldn't vote by mail, I'm not saying you shouldn't early vote or anything that I don't like in terms of policies that undermine election integrity. I'm saying as a policy, we need to get away from that type of voting. Vote in person with a voter ID, have your citizenship verified, make sure the rolls are clean, and count the ballots on the day of the election. Now, does it mean there'll be no voter fraud? It doesn't mean there won't be any problems in election. No, of course not. It's a human activity. Elections, they are kind of like a black hole. Corruption's going to flow through them like light into a black hole because the stakes are so high for politicians and some other bad guys. So that's why we have to mitigate that impact of corruption by having these rules in place. And this free-for-all that we're now in too many ways, in too many states, undermine voter confidence and suppress the vote. People don't want to vote if if they don't feel like their votes aren't going to matter or going to be counted or negated by fraud. Whether it be aliens voting or counting that goes on for days and weeks after elections. I mean, it makes a mockery of the system. And some people won't participate because of that. So not only is Judicial Watch trying to uphold the rule of law when it comes to elections, we're trying to uphold the right to vote. Your right to vote is under attack when there are attacks on election integrity. It is the civil rights issue of our time. The effort to allow it, to make it easier to engage in voter fraud, negates your core civil right to vote and have your vote counted and not negated by illegal votes or fraud or gamesmanship. So when it comes to election integrity, Judicial Watch is a civil rights leader for the right to honest votes from eligible voters.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.